I am the Assistant Director of Editorial Development at the American Chemical Society Publications Division. And this area I'm very familiar with. I almost didn't do this introduction, but then it's not quite March Madness yet. I'm from Duke. So let's get it out of the way. And I hope that's okay. I have high respect for UNC Chapel Hill, although it was a little bit challenging this morning when I had to type in the word Tar Heel at my hotel to get access to the internet. Do I need to put this on slideshow? Probably.
Oh yeah, if you just go all the way top left from the beginning.
From the beginning, it's,
Oh, hold on.
To go all the way back.
Yeah, it's okay. We'll get there. Patience. This has nothing to do with my being from Duke. And so I graduated in '98 from Duke with a PhD in chemistry and went straight into scholarly publishing. I worked for almost 10 years at John Wiley & Sons, and then I managed the chemistry books program there and databases. And then I moved over to the American Chemical Society, where I manage a portfolio of 14 journals and also oversee the books program at ACS. So I'm going to talk a little bit about publishing and in general, and just a brief introduction about how it's changed, and then the ethics of publishing. So the written word, it's changing, right? Evolving, electronic. It's fast with letters and communications content. And it's getting faster with programs at ACS like Just Accepted Manuscripts, where the reviewed content actually appears on the web within 1 to 2 hours of an editor making a decision. It's searchable and it's linkable through programs like our collaboration with SciFinder at CAS, where you can actually link through from an article to all of the reactions there. It's newsworthy in several different places. This is my favorite because it's a New York Times article that connects my personal life. I'm mom to an 8-year-old son who likes Phineas and Ferb. With my publishing life, I'm responsible for Journal of the American Chemical Society, where the platypus article was originally featured. So it was fun to open up the New York Times and find that Phineas and Ferb had collided with Jax. And it's important to our health and everyday living. This is based on an article published in the Journal of Agriculture and Food Chemistry. Oh, that one did not get deleted. It's social. We have a Jack's Facebook page, and we also have Jack's Twitter sites. And it's no longer only written, with projects like video abstracts that are being shown and prepared by professors, explaining their research to you and presented alongside the articles. It's mobile with ACS Mobile, now working on your iPhone and iPad. And iPod Touch. It's changing, right? But there are some things that remain the same, regardless of the changes that are happening at an enormous rate for publishers and for you and for librarians. Certain things remain the same. So let's talk about the written word before we go into ethics and make sure we all understand why it's important. It's the foundation. One of my favorite quotes is an Albert Einstein quote that says, "Knowledge must continually be renewed by ceaseless effort if it is not to be lost." It communicates innovation. So how could that not be important to everything that we do and all of our desires and hopes for our economy, our health, our livelihood? It's achieved via peer review. And that's what we're here to talk about, basically. You, the author, create an article, submit it through the main journal office. It goes in to the editor-in-chief, who assigns it to an associate editor. And then that goes out to different reviewers. That feedback comes back in the reverse direction as well. So publishing is a team effort. And each member, the author, the editors, and the reviewers, have different responsibilities. I did want to mention here that my favorite way to think of a reviewer is a bit like Clue. You want to make sure that all the bits and pieces add up, and what you're looking at a reviewer is something of high quality work. Another tip I always use when talking with reviewers is essentially think about what you're what you're looking at, and would you be willing to have your name put on that particular article? And that's a good way to kind of make the deciding factor that this is something worthy of publishing. So everyone has responsibilities, and let's talk a little bit about those responsibilities. Responsible conduct of research involves understanding the expectations that are out there, and there are a number of expectations from different facets of the world, and basically your scientific field. That includes not only the major field of chemistry or related areas, but also the subset that you're focused on. Sometimes there are different expectations in different fields as to what your responsibility is in terms of maintaining data, preserving the data, sharing the data, those kinds of things. Scientific societies weigh in, and ACS certainly has some input that we'll get to in a bit on ethical obligations. Funding agencies may weigh in on their expectations of you and of us. Your institution has their own sense of ethics that you should abide by. The department, your advisor, and your collaborators, publishers, and the audience have expectations. So I can speak primarily today to ACS's expectations, and that's what I hope to do here. Essentially, what we have is online an ethical guideline, the ACS Journal's ethical guideline. And so the way that we develop this is in conjunction with our editors and the community. The editors of journals that we publish, and we publish 39 now, provide a set of ethical guidelines for those individuals engaged in chemical research, and that covers the breadth of our 39 journals, which actually have outreach into biological areas, medicinal areas, materials, engineering, all sorts of other subsets, physics. And those guidelines are developed and reviewed frequently by our editors alongside ACS staff, so that we make sure that we ensure that they're clear, that they meet current guidelines, and that they meet the current expectations of the research community. And basically, this was developed out of a conviction that high ethical standards is vital to the whole scientific enterprise. And therefore, that should be brought to the attention of those concerned. So we want to communicate clearly with our authors and our reviewers and our audience about our expectations. We've divided this up, basically. We have a set of ethical obligations for our editors, and Royce was speaking a little bit about this. He mentioned the need to be fair. And when we are collaborating with the individuals in the community and searching for new editors, that is certainly a quality that we talk about. In those committees, behind the scenes, we talk about who might the candidates be. That's something that comes out. Are they fair? Are they respected? Are they a highly qualified researcher? Are they timely in their responses? All those kinds of things come out in terms of making a decision about who should be the editor-in-chief of a journal. We expect our editors-in-chief to respect confidentiality and to help arbitrate the communication between authors and reviewers. For those of you who have submitted papers, you know that sometimes the reviewers' comments, you like them and you don't like them. Some of them are great, and you're like, I'll just take this reviewer's comment, thank you very much, I'll ignore this one. But that's the role of the editor and the associate editors, to help arbitrate that communication and make sure that the expectations and the needs for modification for a journal article are made very clearly. The reviewers of manuscripts, we also have a set of ethical obligations for the reviewers, and we expect our reviewers to provide fair, informed, timely, and unbiased reviews. If they have a conflict of interest and they're sent an article to review, we expect them to tell us that they have a conflict of interest. If we're aware of that, we absolutely would not then approach that reviewer, but it's very complicated these days to be aware of everyone's potential involvements with various companies or organizations or research. And then there are ethical obligations that we consider for scientists who publish wherever they publish, basically. So we define that a scientist publishing in the popular literature has the same obligations to be accurate and unbiased. We recently, in October of 2010, rolled out a new electronic journals publishing agreement, and it expanded our authors' rights and clarifies their responsibilities. And this was in regard to some of the initiatives that were mentioned earlier by my colleagues at the table here. So basically, it replaces the previous ACS copyright status form, and it gives authors, ACS authors, some new rights that we've clarified further. In many cases, we were honoring those rights anyway, but I think it's helpful to always have a written document that explains that. This is a very big page. I thought about not including it all, but on the other hand, I realized it was really important to speak to you about what the author himself or herself warranties whenever they make this arrangement with the publisher. You're saying that anything you submit is original, that it's not intentionally misleading or inaccurate, that you've consulted with all authors, and this sometimes becomes a sticky point, I think, for professors whose graduate students might move on, but that you've consulted with all authors and they've given full compliance to put their name on that particular submitted work. That it's not been previously published in any form, and then there's an exception there, that the work is not being considered for publication elsewhere. In other words, we don't find it productive, and we actually would not be approving of authors who are submitting the same work to 10 different places and let's see who accepts it first. That just doesn't work for the publishing enterprise, particularly in an electronic world when you would just submit to 30 journals and see who would accept, which one you get the highest bidder out of. So that's not the way publishing works. It basically doesn't create a sustainable model. And then there's a section that speaks to libel and violation of privacy or infringing on property rights. We also note that nothing in this work infringes on any duty of confidentiality which the author may owe to another party, that you've obtained permissions, which were spoken to briefly by Rebecca also, for the right to use any content that you've reused therein, and that you've disclosed to us any potential competing financial interests. The reason this is important is because, of course, if you are being paid by a corporation, for example, to conduct a certain amount of research for them, then the results should be reviewed in that light, and your work should be reviewed in that light so that we can maintain the integrity of the scientific record. We also give authors a number of rights. I wanted to highlight a few here, basically, that I felt were really important at the university level. One, authors may use all or part of the submitted, accepted, or published work in a thesis or dissertation. I think that's really important for you guys, considering where you're at right now. And then we also speak to reusing figures, text extracts up to 400 words, and data for teaching or training purposes in presentations, in subsequent scholarly publishings of which you are an author, and for posting on an author's personal website, university network, those kinds of things. So what are the ethical issues that we see? To be honest, it's almost the same across any industry. There's either negligence or there's deliberate misinformation. And so we wanted to give some examples of what not to do. And that these are the examples based on things that we frequently see and that show up not only at ACS but in other publishers and scholarly publishing. Duplicate publication or submission of research findings, relatively frequent. And that's something that we do have ways of monitoring that, and they're actually getting better. I'll speak to that in a little bit. Fabricating data or results. That can be sometimes easy to pick up on and sometimes more challenging. Falsifying, changing, or misreporting data or results. That's also, sometimes it's easy to catch and sometimes it's not. Plagiarism, getting much easier for us to catch, particularly because all the content is available electronically. Collecting data without regard to human and animal subject guidelines, and we do have some ethical guidelines related to that that we're reviewing also. Having a conflict of interest that biases the results or interpretation. That one does appear more and more these days, I think, because authors may not be as aware that that's something that they need to disclose. I don't have a feeling that there's a lot of intentional misdisclosure there. It feels to me from the cases that I've seen and been involved with it that this is primarily just they didn't recognize or they thought that the audience would automatically know this relationship that they had because of something that they put in the particular article. So what is plagiarism? Use of someone else's words or ideas without proper acknowledgement. It's so much easier to do nowadays because I think folks are when you're writing a paper, when you're taking your own notes, you're thinking, oh, that's a great way to say that. Let me put it in here. Let me cut and paste and put that in here, and then I'll modify it later. And then there's sort of a loss of recognition that those were not your own words because it's just such a great way to say it, and it fit with your needs at the time. So that's something that you have to be very much aware of. So when citing someone else's ideas, always paraphrase them or summarize it and cite the source. I would suggest if you are doing some sort of cutting and pasting, that you actually go ahead and put it in quotation marks and put the source there so you know that you need to rewrite it. Otherwise, the habit is, it basically, you lose track of where you got that idea from. When you use exact words or phrases from the citation, they must appear in quotation marks and you must cite. And you should also cite the source unless the information is common knowledge. So that would be a situation where you were discussing an idea with someone. It's not commonly known that that idea exists, and so you should cite that source. And one rule of thumb is you should find the same information undocumented in at least 5 other sources. Is it possible to plagiarize your own words? This is something we're asked relatively frequently. So self-plagiarism is when you publish the same work and or submit the same work for credit in 2 different places. And absolutely, in the case of published work, copyright infringement issues take over. So as we were discussing, publication involves transferring the copyright to the publisher. And once that transfer is effected, your words belong to the publisher in that sense. Recycling paragraphs or phrases that are more than 400 words can be construed as copyright infringement. Journals frown on excessive text reuse and frequently are now using text similarity software to detect plagiarism and self-plagiarism. So what's the rule of thumb? Be honest, be ethical. Ethical violations do get exposed. How might this affect you? Scientists have really amazing memories. So if an ethical violation is exposed, this could be damaging to a career. They have access to Google, PubMed, SciFinder, so they have the same access to the resources that are sometimes cut and pasted into other journal articles that you do. They have access to software that detects plagiarism and in some cases image manipulations. The scientific community is watching and policing itself, and we have several instances recently that I've watched where social networking offered a new way to question public works in a very public forum. So that can be even more damaging than it was 10 years ago, for example. And publishers are using technology to identify possible violators. Cross-check is a service that publishers are using very much like Turnitin, and I don't know if Turnitin is used at this university. Do you know? And it's basically a tool where you can compare, you basically do a match of the words and you look for any kind of plagiarism. And with cross-check, it allows publishers then to submit all of their work into this system to be looked at and reviewed. And there's image checking software in various different subfields. The biological field has probably been one of the leaders in that because there was a good amount of image manipulation that was going on with gels, where you would actually delete fade out a particular line that was showing up. And so here's some examples of things that we've seen. And these are a few years old. We do have more, but I think these are really clear examples. You can see the top paper was the original paper, the bottom paper a different set of authors, and the image itself is identical. And then here's an example of the gels. Basically making it appear pure when it wasn't pure. And then manipulated images on the right, and those were revealed by contrast adjustment. Other journals that are using tools, the organic chemists are using some FID software to check and make sure that patterns make sense. And they also use Cambridge Crystallographic database as well. So this is a wonderful quote from the National Academy Press. It's been some time that basically talks about what's wrong with this and why is this so important? Individuals, institutions, and entire research fields can suffer grievous setbacks from instances of fabrication, falsification, or plagiarism, even if they are only tangentially associated with the case. So that's why your institution, your publisher, your society that you're affiliated with wants to make sure that we educate properly and we provide information about ethical behavior. The kinds of things that happen routinely when this information is detected: withdrawal of the paper from publication. And there's a process that we go through. We refer primarily to the COPE guidelines, Committee on Publication Ethics, and we collaborate with our editors. We go through a process. The editor notifies the author that something has been detected, asks for an explanation. We get all sorts of explanations, including "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to more detailed, "Oh, this was someone who's not even here anymore," and unfortunately, the mistake was made and you submitted it with an author with your name on it. So what happens? We do publish withdrawals and sometimes include addenda to further explain, for example, conflict of interest if we feel that it was a minor infraction. We allow our editors to choose for each of our 39 journals what they do to an author. And that can involve banning an author from publication in the journal. Basically, it can say, this is a serious ethical violation and we won't accept your papers for 3 to 5 years. And sometimes informs co-authors and editors of related journals of their actions. So that is really determined by the editor-in-chief of the journal. And we also put the author, some of our journals put the author on a watch list. So they basically say this person has created an ethical violation. We're not sure if we can actually trust the new data that they sent in, so we need to look very carefully at it for future subsequent submissions. So all this wasn't said to terrify you. It was essentially to bring home the importance of ethical behavior and how it can affect not only you, but all of your collaborators, your research advisor, your institution, your society that you're affiliated with, the journal that you're published in, and to thank you, because most of the cases, in most of the situation, you are all responsible contributing members of the scientific community. And that's what makes this operation work. And we want to thank you for creating a foundation of knowledge, advancing science, and advancing society. I'd be happy to take questions.
If anyone has questions, we can. Thank you.
Hi, I'm from Duke too, so.
Okay.
I have a question. Besides publication, there's also many conference. So is it safe to announce research in conference for unpublished work? And if you announce it and somebody else take it, is it also an ethical violation? How is it taken?
It's a very good question. And so I would say for ACS, each of our journals sets, because we rely on practicing editors and researchers in the community who know that subset of the community better, we allow our editors to actually set the guidelines for what they will and will not count as prior submission at this point. And so it depends on the particular field you're in and the journal that you want to publish in. And for almost all of those, announcing and presenting your research is okay. The balance comes for some of the editors in, is that research then also that you presented at a conference, is it made available electronically? And so that's where our editors have different opinions. And indeed, the community at large and the entire scientific, technical, and medical community has different opinions about whether or not that counts as prior publication. So if you know that you're going to submit your work to a particular journal or two, you might want to take a look at their prior publication policies before you sign on to have anything delivered electronically from a conference.
I have a question related to ACS preprints for meetings. Do those, I think I read one time, I can't remember if that was true, that you have the preprints that you submit count as work that's associated with you for a year, but after that it's questionable. Is that true, or is that
So preprints is a complicated situation, and my understanding of preprints is that that you don't actually sign the full ACS copyright form for that. That's because the preprints are handled out of particular subject divisions and not by ACS publications overall. So it's a slightly different product. I don't have the exact answer for you, but I'd be happy to follow up afterwards and get you that answer.
I'm Dave Marks.
Dave's torturing me.
Could you comment a little bit on the conflict of interest? You talked about reviewers had to say if they had a conflict of interest. And in one sense, if I'm in a competitive field and I'm asked to review an article, don't I automatically have a conflict of interest? So what do you mean by that?
Thank you, Dave. That's a very important point. And we are working on conflict of interest and considering some sort of policy that we might enact that would better explain that. The conflict of interest doesn't have to do with the researcher working in the same field. So if I'm working on the synthesis of a nicomycin and I get a paper to review that's a synthesis of a nicomycin, that's not necessarily a conflict of interest. I'm an expert in the field of nicomycin synthesis, therefore I, of course, should be called on to review this particular paper. The conflict of interest really has to do with if I am working on a synthesis for pharmaceutical company A in my spare time, where I have a collaboration with them, and a paper that publishes could damage that particular interest that I have with this pharmaceutical company and the project that I have ongoing, that would be considered a conflict of interest. There are other examples, and we're hoping to clarify that a little more in the future so that people are not confused as Dr. Martinson was. Yes?
Can you comment more on the first scenario that you gave? Because it would seem to me that it is a conflict of interest if you're working in that exact same field that you're asked to review.
Yeah, it is one of the challenges, and so that's one of the reasons why we don't have just one reviewer. We would go to several experts who review and understand the area, and that goes back to the expectation of the reviewer to be fair. If this is a work that is worthy of publishing and a good synthesis, then you as a reviewer also have an obligation to do that. If you felt you couldn't review it fairly, you're always given the opportunity to opt out and to say, no, I can't review this fairly. So, I think that the safeguard we have there is that it's not just your direct competitor who's possibly looking at your paper. It's others in the field. It's the associate editor and the editor-in-chief with a broader understanding of that. And that's why our decisions don't lie with the reviewers. They lie with our associate editors and our editor-in-chief. Other questions? Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure being here, and I'll be around all day if any of you want to speak about issues related to ethics and scholarly publishing, or to ask questions about careers in publishing.